What I've learned over 50 years is that your body is not broken. When your body's really broken,
Please repeat that.
your body is not broken. The biggest burden that has been placed upon you and you can place on yourself is saying to yourself, my chronic illness, whatever it may be, is permanent. It is not. This is my lot in life. This is not.
Well, hello, listener. Welcome back to Find Your Flow. You know, if you've listened to a couple of episodes, you all know that I'm slightly obsessed with nervous system regulation, with normalizing these conversations about burnout and what can we do to live our best life. That's what Find Your Flow is all about. So today, I have the pleasure of talking with He is a functional medicine practitioner with nearly 50 years, and you probably won't believe that when you are looking at him, but with nearly 50 years, I'm having a hard time believing it, of clinical experience helping people navigate complex chronic illness, burnout, neurodiversity, chronic fatigue, long COVID, anxiety, and nervous system dysregulation. His work focuses on uncovering the biological root. You know that speaks to my heart. Biological root causes behind symptoms that are often misunderstood as purely psychological or emotional. I love it when people are not dismissed as a diagnosis. I've been there. I've been through that. So anyone who can join me to help normalize these conversations and find new pathways forward, that makes me excited. I hope you're excited. So Dr. Jess, please welcome to Find Your
Thank you so
Flow.
much. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity. And by the way, I'm 69 years old and I started in 1975. And yes, 50 years.
That's fantastic. I love the math. Are we doing the math? Fantastic. You have a lot of experience. You work worldwide. So I cannot wait to get your perspective on flow, your story of when you were out of flow, and then most importantly, how you found your way back, because you work with so many people covering so many different topics and concerns. Can we start off, please? What is your definition of flow?
Flow for me is aligning with who I truly am rather than who I thought I was supposed to be. You know, as a healthcare provider or a mom or a dad, you have this concept of what you should be and you chase that. So for many years, I believe success meant working harder, pushing through exhaustion, sacrificing myself for others, constantly striving to achieve more. I spent decades helping patients, building businesses, teaching. I do an awful lot of teaching now, and trying to carry responsibilities that were often larger than myself. And when you do too many things at once, you take no time and no focus on yourself at all. I mean, I've got a ton of degrees and a ton of certifications, but I can see how that dragged me down. So you can look successful, but internally, is disconnected from the flow. And I like that concept, by the way, that, find the flow. Being in the flow is, alignment with the universe, alignment with the energy that's around that carries you along. And when you divorce yourself from that, when you pull yourself away from that, you're going to hit the rocky shores very easy. So that's basically how I conceive finding the flow or being in the flow.
Let me ask you. I
Sure.
don't usually start jumping right in with questions, but I have one and I
Jump
wrote it
in,
down.
please. I like it.
When someone is constantly living for a long period of time, constantly living by someone else's definition of what success may look like, right? Or I always love, and I say that sarcastically, love the concept of being in service, not of service, in service to others, which for me has this connotation of being in servitude to others. So to my deficit, I serve you. And I think a lot of moms out there can identify with that. I think a lot of dads out there can identify with that.
Moms more.
Moms more, agreed. Yeah, because we're just sort of ingrained with this whole I'll die for my children and I will give of myself 1,000% of the time. I'll go without food. I'll go without sleep, whatever makes you happy. But when you live like that for prolonged periods of time, what does that look like to the human body? Well, how does that show up?
Well, let's take women in general, okay, because I see this more there. The expectations on women are immense. You're stimulated to be, a working mom and a good wife and a good mom and run the household and, basically nurture the children and so forth. It is, in fact, an impossible task. Okay. And concerning tasks, there were studies done on F-16 pilots. when they were overburdened, they would
Mhm.
drop tasks called task shedding, which now is used a lot in corporate America. So when you're like that, you're living on adrenaline. You're living by doing a constant fight or flight. When that happens, you start using, if you will, using up your reserves, your energy reserves. Your
Mhm.
body says, I will compensate as best as I can, because that's what your body does. It just
Exhaustion.
doesn't fail. It will always compensate as best as it can until it can't. And we'll call that decompensation, or that's where you start seeing symptoms or the nervous breakdown and so forth.
Yes.
So, people think, but the unfortunate thing is people think that anxiety, fatigue, brain fog, chronic illness is the problem. The thing is, we've failed to listen to the messages we're being given. Okay. And because the expectation is to do more and the feedback that you get from
Mhm.
your peers. So if it will be other women, from the other men,
Just dig deeper.
right?
Find
Just
it
dig
yeah.
deeper,
Mhm.
dig your heels in. This isn't so bad. And then you start getting different issues. There's a concept called neuroendoimmunology, which I got the first certification in, which is the communication between the nervous system, the
Mhm.
hormonal system, and the immune system. And they constantly talk to one another. I mean, they're chattering constantly. And that's how you maintain homeostasis or balance. And when you become imbalanced because of numerous factors, let's say it's in the immune system, when you end up getting leaky gut syndrome and starts messing with your immune system, the signaling between there and your brain, between the gut and your brain, the gut brain axis. And I lectured on that in September in Dublin. Okay. The gut brain axis and its relationship to neurodiversity. The signaling, which is supposed to be normal. If your gut is normal, then the brain is perceiving the signals. That's what they're used to. And the brain has the normal signals, blah, 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 everybody's happy. When you change the microbiome, you change parameters there, it sends wrong or bad signals, which changes the neurotransmitter balance, which ends up in mood disorders, thought disorders, anxiety, depression, and it
Mhm.
contributes to burnout. You're wondering why you're having all kinds of, let's say, menopausal symptoms.
Mhm.
You know, long-term insults to those other systems will cause your adrenal glands to become very, very weak. When you get into menopause, the ovaries aren't working the way they're supposed to. And the cascade looks like this: cholesterol, pregnenolone, which also creates progesterone, then DHEA, dehydroxyapatindrosterone, which is produced by the adrenal glands to create testosterone, and then estrogen. Okay, just generally speaking. So your sex hormones come more from your adrenal gland with the DHEA, and that's why you're not getting your period, because you're not getting so much progesterone. Okay, so guess what? That's a matter of burnout. Okay, burnout is an actual thing. It's an actual thing. It's not a psychiatric or a
Not a
psychological.
concept. Right, right, right.
No, it's an actual thing. It's a physiological thing. So it's going to be hard to go against that, by the way. It's very hard to go against that whole tide of
Yeah.
expectations, because when something happens with a kid, they just go straight for the mom, you know. So you're forced, you're in, you can't be perfect, but you're expected to be perfect. That's a lot of stress. If you really want to know, and since you asked, the basis of all illness is something called a cell danger response. And I'll explain it very, very simply. And this was explained by Dr. Robert Navio, who's an MD PhD, by the way, in the paper that he wrote in 2013. What he said was everything that injures a cell divided into toxins, as you might expect, microbes, viruses, parasites, yada yada, and all the psychological, spiritual, and emotional traumas will injure a cell in equal measure as microbes and toxins. And in this, long COVID has to do with the spike protein, but it's a talk for another time. So with the consistent emotional trauma, or so, however you want to put it, the whole psychological thing, it's not just in your head. It
Yeah.
has an actual effect on your cells. There are
Yeah.
other studies that show that depression and anxiety support the creation of something called pro-inflammatory cytokines, which is inflammation. By the
Mhm.
way, chronic inflammation, the result of cell danger response, is what initiates all kinds of illnesses. Okay. And you're using up everything. And then you start putting food into your body, even though you're
Mhm.
trying hard. Okay. Things get really busy, and you get more foods that have been pre-cooked, or and the more that something's processed, okay, the less nutrient value it has. Because if you have doing all this stuff, how can you be home? Shopping for organic vegetables, cooking vegetables,
Yes.
cooking, getting the proper meat, cooking, making sure everybody has good meals. By the
Something's
way,
gotta give.
it is. By the
Yeah.
way, if you have 21 meals a week, let's say 3 times a day, and you have 1 or 2 junky meals, or three, don't worry about it. Okay, it's not a big deal. All right, you have 19 or 20 junky meals, that can be an issue. All right. So, it's a bad day. You order a pizza. Don't beat yourself up. Okay. It's just a bad day and it's just a pizza. Okay. The kids are going to want it every day, but they're kids. They want pizza all the time. Why wouldn't they?
Of
It's like,
course.
and they've got a good reserve of energy. So they're going to wear you down.
Right. Yes. Listen, they're no, I used to say about the kids when they were little, their number one job was to hold their parameters. And that was like Chinese water torture. But,
Yes.
and I said, and they are stellar at their job. I
Yes.
mean, they are just the CEOs of their job, of
That
holding their
only calls that
parameters.
only calls for creativity on our parts.
Exactly.
If you're
Exactly.
fighting it, just step off to the side and say, "Okay, who wants to do this?" Like, really? Okay.
My husband used to say, like, whatever it is that we were trying to get them to do or to accept, you can do this or you could go to bed, but I'm giving you a choice. Do you want to do this or do you want to go to bed? Do you want to do this or go to bed? I'll do that. Okay.
It's like if you don't want them to have soda, say, "Listen, I have juice and I have milk. Which one do you want?"
That's right.
Especially little boys, they're going to get hungry very fast. And you say,
Don't even get me
"Well,
started. I don't know how you had three. I can barely feed the one. I thank God that he's been away at school, but he's home. He's coming home in a couple
that's
of
right.
weeks.
Just
And
just back up a cow. He'll cut off his own piece."
that is exactly correct.
I used to have to guard the barbecue. I'm
Yes.
cooking, they're swiping stuff off the barbecue. I hired a dog.
Yes.
See, come over here. See this steak? Yeah, I'll give you half now, half when I get the food off it.
We just have to be prepared. That's all. We just have to be
And
prepared.
just be creative. They're being themselves. They're these
Yes.
flowers that are growing.
Yes.
Try not to stomp the flower because even a damaged crooked flower will grow.
It's still beautiful.
Okay.
Yes.
And guess what? They're resilient too. So if you make mistakes, which we all do as parents, okay,
100%.
it's really good to own up to the mistake. It's the way you'd want
Yes.
them to learn. You sit there and say, "Listen, I messed up. I was thinking this and that, and I'm really wrong. So next time, how about we do it this way, and we'll all be good." And they're like, "Great, no problem." And they just go along with their lives because they
Right.
love you and they're
That's right.
very resilient.
Yes. I've learned so much just by parenting and the act of humility and grace that I
It
have to
is.
show myself in order to be able to teach it and then have it be returned.
It
And I
does.
think a lot of what you're saying really does fall into that whole same conversation. Being able to honor yourself and give yourself some grace to be able to then show up in a better way in the rest of your life. I will say I remember when we had our daughter, and I went back to work. I took time off. I took time off from work and I went back to work. I went back to work part-time after our daughter, and I lasted about a year. And then I walked into the office and I looked around and I went right into my manager's office and I just burst out into tears. And this poor man, he's still one of my closest friends. I love him. His wife was pregnant at the exact same time that I was pregnant. We delivered like 3 months apart. He was surrounded by hormonal women and he was so
Poor
loving and
guy.
kind. Poor guy. Poor guy. He had his wife at home and then he had me at work and we were like, "I'm sorry you're bookended by this, but this is your life." But I walked in and I cried and I said to him, "I feel like a failure. I'm failing at home and I'm failing at work and I don't know what to do anymore. That means I'm failing as a human being." And
And that's
he started crying. He was heartbroken. How could you feel like that? How the empathy that came from him. And he's a solve it. I was in finance and he's a solve it kind of guy. So he was like, we're going to solve this. We're going to figure it out. What do you need? And I said, I honest to God, I don't know. I don't know what I need. And fast forward, I tried less hours at work. I tried changing the commute. I tried so many fix it tools. And at the end of the day, I said to my husband, let's crunch the numbers. Let's see if I can leave because I have to choose. I have to choose. That was very personal. And I think we cleared $100 a month between daycare and the train and eating out and, all of the things that I needed to put into place to be able to live these two lives just was not worth it to me. And when I quit my job that first day home, I was scared out of my mind. Did I make the right decision? And I remember carrying our daughter, who was 15 months at the time, walking down the stairs. And she looked at me because I was in my pajamas and she's in her pajamas. And she looked and she said, "No school, mommy?" And I said, "No, baby, no school." And then we kept going down the stairs and she stopped me again and she's like patting my shoulder. And she looked at me and she said, "No school?" And I said, "No, no school. Never, no more. I'm home now." And she still brings tears to my eyes. Those tiny little hands cupped my face and she said, "Good girl, mommy." And that right there, I was like, I called my
And that
husband and
was
I said,
worth
"We
it.
made the right decision." And it doesn't matter, right? Going forward, of course, I lost my mind on many, many times. I had to find different ways to stimulate my brain and to introduce new things into my life. But it was that making new choices. And then, of course, when we had our son, I was faced with the same thing and fell into the habit of being the perfect mom. Because if I'm not going to be a working mom, then I damn well better be the perfect mom. And that led to burnout, exhaustion. I didn't know who in the hell I was. One day I woke
Exactly.
up and that familiar feeling of being a failure happened all over again. And it wasn't a choice between working and being a mother. It was being Lisa at like running 100 miles per hour or Lisa collapsed, exhausted. Like where was the in between? Where was the balance? How can we help listeners find that balance in their own life?
It's a very good question. Okay.
Share your journey.
Sure, I
Because
will. I
you,
will.
uh-huh.
Like I said before, I did all these things. I was trying to do everything. And by the way, with children, it is okay and preferred that you show them your vulnerability. I always told my sons that the successful man is the one that falls down, gets back up, falls down, gets back up, falls down, gets back up. And they've seen me see it happen to me. Okay. I had done so many things and I was up to being lecturing and being a world class physician and I have a history of alcoholism in my family. Of course, that wasn't going to happen to me, which it did. Okay. And,
Genetics, what are that? What's that?
well, it's the genetic, it's a tendency. Okay. And if you're going to, if you're going to have if your body's going to handle things a certain way, it'll go towards whatever the
Yes.
tendencies are. Okay.
Yeah.
So, but that ended up happening with me. Okay. And I basically lost everything. Okay. Just short of losing my mind. And, I had to embrace the ultimate vulnerability and admit to myself this was something I couldn't handle by myself. So I went to rehab and, I lived in a sober house for a while when I got out and rebuilt myself to where I am now, which is actually, farther along than where I was because instead of doing what I do, and I love what I do, I've been a nurse, I've been a paramedic, I've been a chiropractor, I do functional medicine. I do a lot of different things. Okay. And everything goes into being able to take care of those people who have been here, there, and everywhere and not gotten answers and have not gotten better. I'm the guy they can go to and say, and I can sit there and listen to them, which is listening is the big deal. Okay. And figure out what stone's been left unturned. Okay. Because I will do it because now my work comes from purpose rather than pressure. I'll accept a smaller practice, which I do, so that I can concentrate more on my patients. I lecture because I want to take all this knowledge that I've accumulated and hand it off to a new generation of doctors. I lecture medical doctors because they're very interested in functional medicine because they have nightmare patients. How did it get there? Well, if you're an alcoholic, like me, you end up going through the 12 steps if you're in the AA program, which is essentially looking at yourself, admitting you can't handle things, and start going through the detritus of your personality. Because, the old saying is, we come to stop drinking and we come for the drinking, but stay for the thinking, because it's here. Otherwise, you switch
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
addictions. I've had
Right.
guys in my sober house that went from alcoholism and all they do is sit there and gamble,
Right.
you know?
Right.
Stuff like that. So the problem was I didn't know I was out of the flow. If we're going to use that concept, it's very hard to tell because your expectations have been ingrained in you. You're expected to do this. It's funny. I work with people all the time, but it's with them, not with me. Okay. So guess what? I can't take my issues and discuss it with a patient. They're not here for that. They haven't paid me
Right.
for that. They paid me to look at and I have to be 100% present. I have to be, I want to be, and I am. Okay. But now I do things not for self aggrandizement or ego or pressure or the need for funding or whatever. It's because I love it. I have a purpose and I know this is the path that God wants me on. Okay. Exhaustion, getting a balance. The first thing you got to say to yourself is, don't bite off more than you can chew. All right. You never know how much that's going to be until you bite off more than you can chew. Don't sit there and say, "Oh, I should be able to do this." No, back
I
up,
bit off more than I could chew. I'm gonna spit some
spit
of
it
this
out,
out.
and go back and let me when I'm gonna eat that apple, maybe I'll take smaller bites.
That's right.
If you're starting to get ill, by the way, you're probably ignoring it, okay? Constant
Ding, ding, ding,
fatigue
ding, ding.
is not normal. The burnout symptoms of inflammation, and if you're having to drink caffeine, or anything else as an energy drink just to get through the day, something's wrong. And the problem is, yeah, sometimes you got to do things just to get through the day, but you got to also ask yourself, if this is a habit, if I can't get going without my Red Bull or without my cup of coffee, in the morning, you have to ask yourself, what's going on? These are signals. Okay, so if you at least take the signals and put them together and say, what's happening here? Why can't I do things like I used to? Why don't I have the energy that I used to? As you go along in life, you just kind of remember that the toxins and everything else, they build up, and your ability to compensate becomes less and less and less. And then you have all kinds of assaults that are going on, COVID, and then all these various viruses and stuff that are out there, and the toxins are ridiculous. We can go into all of that stuff, but cumulatively, the fact is a younger person, a kid, can handle it more because they don't have as much oxidative stress in their bodies. Okay. If you want to talk about oxidative stress, or that's the basis, that's chronic inflammation. That's the basis of everything. When you're having to fight that, your energy is just fighting that, and other things become dysregulated. Okay. Your body's like a big interacts in a big webby fashion, and, I could give you great, interesting lectures because I use Bugs Bunny and the Roadrunner. And I think of everything in cartoons, by the way.
Love that. I love it.
They say, yeah, because what I'm known for is really taking these complex things and
Make
explaining
them
them simply,
simple. Yes.
because I first think of it in cartoons. Okay. I was like, okay,
I
now
love
let me explain
everything
it.
about that. Mainly
But
because I speak in sound. You know?
there you go. But, we talk about things of listening to yourself. Okay. Listening to the signals that you're having, realizing that certain things that you're saying, I'll just have to put up with it. Not necessarily so. If you have burnout,
We call like aging.
well, see, that's the
You know
whole
when
thing. I
people
think,
say, "Oh,
oh, it's
your
just, you're just
30s,
getting
you're
older.
never the
Okay.
same. 40s, you're never the same. 50s, it's all
Yeah.
downhill."
My doctor did the same thing to me a couple of weeks ago, and they said, "You're planning on walking out of here, right?" Yeah. Okay, good. How about you not use that phrase again? Okay.
Yeah. Because I have to say, let me do the math real quick, 54. I am 54. And number one, I have a hard time remembering my age because I don't feel what people label 54 to be. I really don't. I am healthier today than I was in my 40s, than I was in my 30s. I don't know about my 20s, but definitely going into my 30s and my 40s, I am healthier now. And I swear it's because inflammation became like this target for me where I was like, we got to get at that. So it was like 20 years ago, I started to really, it started because I wanted my children to have a healthier lifestyle than I had. So I started changing our diet and slowly planting all of that into their little bodies and into their brains so that that would become a habit for them so that they could be healthier adults. Who knows if it took? It definitely did
It
with our
does. You'll
daughter,
see it
not
as they
so
get.
much with our son. I
You'll
don't
see it as
know.
they get older. You'll see it as they get older.
That's what
You
I'm
know.
hoping. I'm hoping that the college student is just living like a college student. And then when he gets out in the world, he starts to eat a little bit healthier. We'll
Just
see.
remember, he'll attract a woman or a partner that's very much like you. Okay, and they will
Yes.
resonate. We resonate
Yes.
on the quantum level. Okay, like attracts like in the universe. So, and I see this in genetics, because I'm also a genetic expert. I'll read the pattern of a husband and wife, and they look like brother and sister,
Yeah.
when I'm looking at
Yeah.
them. I say, that's why they resonate, because even at a genetic level, they're similar. So that's when you say, we vibe together, we resonate together.
Mm,
It's true. It's
it's
very
very true.
true.
Very, very
You do
true.
very well. Yeah, if you have two different crystals, like a ruby crystal and a quartz crystal, and you get one of them vibrating, put it next to the other. The other will vibrate, but then it's going to stop because it's not the natural vibration. But two quartz crystals, start one of them vibrating, put them together, they vibrate at the same frequency and they feel better about each other. Okay. That goes right down into basic chemistry as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
To
Yeah.
bring it out to the macro, burnout is not a psychological problem alone. And we're forced to think that it's biological. We talk about chronic inflammation. nervous system overload, which is the whole thing we're talking about when we have kind of
Yes. Yes.
expectations, mitochondrial dysfunction, which means you're unable to produce the amount of energy that you used to be able to because of the effect of long-term chronic inflammation. Anxiety, depression is a message. It's not a mental illness. Difference, okay? When you have situational depression, you break up with a boyfriend or a girlfriend, you have a fight and so forth, normal. Situational anxiety, someone, you go to work, they're yelling at you, put you under a lot of pressure. But when you have anxiety or depression for no reason, then it's ongoing. Yes, you try and backfill in rationale. I know that. Okay. But if you really look at it, you have no reason for it. That's not a mental illness. That is your physiology struggling.
Yes.
Gut brain
Yes.
axis, neurotransmitter, nutrient deficiencies. Remember, we talk about, oh, you need nutrients. Yeah. And even the stuff that you take in as vitamins, 9 times out of 10, it doesn't get absorbed. If you can't get it absorbed into the cells, what's the sense? That's why you need to use like liposomal vitamins. At least they get into the cells because your biochemical processes need those things to run. So people feel stuck, I think, because they're living according to expectations. Because they're doing that, they're ignoring their body signals. And
Yes.
just like you said, perfectionism, and they're adapting to chronic stress. By the way, about fight or flight, we are adapted to do that once every 6 weeks. This is a BC body in AD time, not 4, 5, 6 times a day, like you go to your normal radio news radio station. Okay. We are not adapted to that. And even though we try and adapt to it, we pay the price down the road. Okay. So finding your flow, and I like to call it bioenergetic coherence, just a word that I put
No, I
together
love
when
that.
I wrote a paper on it and so forth. What that is your cells are communicating properly. Your nervous system feels safe because a lot of times you're not safe. You're not feeling safe. And it doesn't mean that you're walking down the dark street and somebody's following you. What it means is that you're not meeting your own expectations or society's expectations. You don't feel safe. Okay.
And that could happen in your home, listener.
Absolutely.
You could be
Absolutely.
sitting there with no threat whatsoever in your favorite chair, in your favorite room, and still feel unsafe. This is what he's
Right.
talking about.
This is that constant, high level of feeling vulnerable, that kind of
Yeah.
always on like this,
Yeah.
and when your biology and purpose align, and sometimes you have to get, just like you did, which is a very good example of it. It was hard to do what you do, leaving work and being with the family. Okay. Yes, I
Absolutely.
understand this completely. Okay. Really, and it has a multi-level thing. One, financial, which you worked out with your husband. Okay.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure that you actually, you know, ended up with more money because you were paying for this and that and this and that, right?
We really did.
Good,
Because
good.
let's be clear, $100 of coffee, that could happen,
Yeah,
you
really.
know?
But in reality, it's also the perceived degradation of your personality.
Yes.
Okay. Which is
The
that
egoic
whole,
reasoning behind it.
exactly,
Right.
exactly.
Do I
So,
have purpose? Do I have meaning? Do I have worth, value
right.
if I leave this or
And of
that?
course, this
Yeah.
starts way back with what's expected of you. I feel bad for women because they're expected to be the everything for everybody. Okay. And
Mhm.
I believe that relationships should be interdependent, not codependent, but interdependent. I think that men are from Mars and women are from Venus. We are inherently different, but we complement one another. Okay.
Yes.
So
2
in any
sides of the
relation,
same coin. Yep.
yeah, exactly. In any relationship, you kind of develop a system where, you're doing things that you're good at, not doing things that I'm good at.
Mhm.
My wife got hurt one day and had to be bedridden until my mom was going to come up from Brooklyn to help us. But in the meantime, I took several days off of work. This was quite a while ago. And I'm cooking and ironing and sewing and doing this. And my kids are like, you know how to do that? I'm like, yeah, you don't? Come on, I'll show you. You know?
Boy Scout. Hello, you have a
Yeah,
lot of skills.
I was a captain in the army. I think I know how to make a bed, really,
Do.
you know, but they never saw me do it because she always did that because she's a nurse. And we decided at the beginning that she would stay home, and it was very hard in her transition. But when she saw that, we had a stability, then, and she's the best nurse I've ever known and the best mom in the world. This is before all the PDAs and stuff. And she'd have like
Yeah,
several
yeah.
calendars up there consulting them all the time, who's got to
Listen,
go where, the cats, has
the
separate calendars,
Post-its, oh my god. Yes.
you
Yes,
know,
herding cats. Mhm.
herding cats is right. We've had a lot. But I'll tell you something. What I've learned over 50 years is that your body is not broken. When your
Oh,
body's really broken,
please repeat that.
your body is not broken. And the biggest burden that has been placed upon you and you can place on yourself is saying to yourself, my chronic illness, whatever it may be, is permanent. It is not. This is my lot in life. This is not. Okay.
Yes.
It is something that should be looked at, I'll say clinically, but back it up, you know. By the way, Madame Curie always said, nothing in life should be feared, but merely understood. Okay. We deal with a
Mm,
lot of fear, a lot of anxiety. Back up,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
say, okay,
Yeah.
what?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it may be a matter of speaking with a counselor, speaking with your pastor, speaking with, other people. Sometimes it's hard for you to see the literal forest through the trees. Okay. Always realize that your body's adapting. It's trying to compensate. It's trying to adapt. And when those adaptation mechanisms do not compensate any longer, okay, that's when you start getting symptoms. So sometimes your symptoms do not actually point to your pathology. It is literally a downstream effect of the pathology. And really, healing begins when you understand what you're adapting to. Okay. If you have most of what I do, because I can tell you ubiquitously, my patients are terrified. Okay. They come to me as a last resort because I'm the quack. It's like, well, I heard you can help me. I'm like, sure, no problem. And they're like, really? I'm like, yeah. I laugh.
Yeah. You're my normal.
I use humor a lot because I believe that disease is a bully, and to take its power away, you punch it in the nose or you laugh at it. Okay. And once we do that, once we say, okay, listen, one of my patients emailed me this morning. She's in Canada. I'm sorry, in the UK, because she's having some trouble breathing. We just haven't really started with her yet. And her doctor gave her some inhalers. She said, should I use them? I said, sure. She's still, I want you to breathe better. She said, well, asthma is incurable. I said, no, asthma's not curable. Asthma's curable. It's an allergic problem. I said, as soon as we start working together, which is going to be early next week, we'll work. But she's like, whew, now I'm hopeful. There you go.
There you
Even,
go. And
even,
it all
even
starts there.
it starts there. It starts when you realize that you're not broken. It starts when you accept that and you say, there might be another way to look at this. So when you go to Dr. Google, my nemesis, by the way, Dr. Google, you start looking for different reasons, different base reasons that maybe I'm not getting better from all these different. If I have an autoimmune disease and your doctor says it's genetic, really? How come you didn't have it as a baby? Okay, your genes haven't changed. Genes don't change over your lifetime. They're there. Okay. So how come I have Hashimoto's? How come I have rheumatoid arthritis? How come I have mast cell activation disorder, at ages 35, 40, whatever it happens to be? Why? Ask that question. Realize that this is not your lot in life. Ask that question, why now? And you work your way backwards from there. I do a lot of
Yes.
extrapolating. Okay. I can take somebody's
I love
history and
that.
figure it out, definitely where the problems are. Okay. Yes, it takes a lot of training to do it. I had a gentleman who
Mhm.
couldn't leave the house because of severe anxiety. And he used to be a businessman, and we took a very long history. And his issue started in fourth grade. He started getting ADD, and then that kind of burgeoned from there.
Mhm.
So I went back and said, let's talk about fourth grade again. Did anything happen around then? He said, no. I said, something weird. What? I lost my taste for meat. I'm like, really? A boy?
That's
Let's
right.
check your
Huh?
genetics, make sure you got the, X, Y and stuff. But then again, I knew there was an issue. There could be an issue. They're asking me to camp a lot. And they did. There's a certain kind of Lyme disease that causes alpha gal syndrome, which is you lose your taste for meat. And guess what? He has had long-term neural Lyme disease that has been burgeoning his neural inflammation over many years. And he compensated and compensated. He had businesses that compensated and compensated until he could compensate no more. Okay. Having that plus knowing what happens to his physiology, he started intervening and he's beginning to feel better. He's went from severe depression to where he's like, hey, I'm going to go out to the store. I'm like, enjoy yourself, but knowing that he's not broken, that it's not his lot in life, which is his biggest thing he was saying to me. I don't think you can help me. I said, what'd you hire me? I don't think you can help me. Okay. I guess you like spending money, huh?
Then you will always be correct. If you think you can't get help, then you won't get help. If you think you can be helped, then you will be helped.
Exactly.
You are true both ways. When I had about 10 years ago, I was out to breakfast with friends, and suddenly in the middle of everything, I felt this huge squeeze at the back of my head, and then I blacked out. Yeah. And when I came to, I couldn't see, I couldn't hear, I didn't know which end was up. I lost orientation. And then gradually over a 9-month period, I lost functions. I could no longer sit. I had palsy and, I couldn't live independently, couldn't shower, couldn't feed myself, all of these things. And the doctors all told me, this is your lot in life. They told my husband, I don't know what to tell you. She was this healthy 40-year-old and now she's not. There's no return from this. There is absolutely no recovery from whatever is going on with her. We think it could be
I love
neurological.
when they say that. It's
Right.
makes me drool.
And to which I kept saying, I am telling you, there is something at the base of my skull. I am telling you to look at the base of my skull. I can sense it. I can feel it. I can almost smell it, taste it. It's gray and it's preventing flow up into my brain. I'm telling you right now, neurological flow, blood flow, something is at the base of my skull. And they're like, Lisa, we've taken all the x-rays, there's MRIs, we've done all the tests. There's nothing at the base of your skull. The last straw for me, at least, and for my husband, was when an ENT said, let's go for exploratory surgery. Let's drill a hole behind your ear and we'll send a scope. First things first, it'll take the pressure off your brain. I'm telling you right now, there's not pressure on my brain. There's a blockage at the base of my skull, but whatever. Second of all, we can really get in there and see what's going on. Thanks, no. I don't understand how that's a solution. So thanks, no. And then my sister, who was a nurse, said, there's this person, this cousin of a colleague who had sort of your symptoms, but not as bad. And she saw this chiropractor. Would you be up for that? I've seen literally the laundry list of every specialist. I'll go to the chiropractor. And speaking of humor as therapeutic, there I was, like greasy hair and unable to see and, all of the things just sort of lumped there. And my husband's holding me up. And I felt these hands on my thighs. And then she was so close to me, cheek to cheek. She's talking into my ear and she's whispering and she says, this is your atlas. And I understand. You can't really see, you can't really hear. You're probably very nauseous. You're probably like passing out all the time. And I said yes to all of that. And she said, okay, I'm going to be able to see you in about 10 minutes. And I get your concept of time. You don't have that either. I'm going to see you in about 10 minutes. Between now and then, if you have to throw up, ask for a bag because all of my trash cans are mesh and it's going to just come out. And I don't want that on my floor. I laughed for the first time in 9 months. I was given hope for the first time in 9 months. And then we went in, she gave me the adjustment, and within 10 minutes, I got my eyesight back. And I just started to cry. And then she
I know the technique.
took the dimmer off the lights and gave me light and was like, she's going to need sunglasses. Go get her sunglasses. The sun is going to burn her retina. Don't worry about it, right? Just get her some sunglasses. She leaned me up against the wall and said, your body needs to orient. I'm sorry that this is uncomfortable for you, but you're weak. But your body needs to know what it feels like to have support and to stand. And I was like, okay. As I was like, whoa, I think I might throw up. And she's like, and if you throw up, you throw up. Your vagus nerve needs to recalibrate. Everything about you needs to recalibrate. So I got adjustments 3 times a week for several months. And I was like about 75. And I was like, well, this is a hell of a lot better than the whole, you're going to be in a wheelchair for the rest of your life, with feeding tubes and caretakers and the whole 9 yards. And then somebody told me about an Atlas orthogonist, a specialist for the Atlas. And I said to my brother-in-law, I just don't know if I have hope for a full recovery. I was told I'll never have a full recovery. I feel like I beat the odds at 75%. Do I have the audacity to hope? And he said, when an angel is delivered to your door and tells you where to go and tells you what to do, who are you to say no? And I went, you're right. So long story short, I made the appointment. That doctor took x-rays through my jaw, saw where the
Atlas listing was.
Yeah. Boom. And where's the Atlas? Base of my skull. It had shifted to the right and twisted forward. Where was the blockage? And he said,
I know
we'll
the
get you
technique real
going.
well. And once you do that, you can orient the adjustments specifically to reduce that.
Reversed everything.
Yeah.
Reversed everything. And not only did I get to 100%, like I said earlier, I am healthier now than I was in my 40s, in my 30s. I am a healthier woman now. And I say that as a woman who wound up losing an ovary in her 30s, having numerous surgeries in her 40s. This shit is reversible, listener.
It's
I'm
it
just
it it
saying.
starts it's everybody's an individual, okay? Let's acknowledge the fact that everybody's an individual,
Yes.
and the fact is that each person's issues are, very unique to them, okay? But
Yes.
ubiquitously throughout, to say to yourself, "Your body's not broken." Now, if you had a transverse dissection of the spinal cord, especially now you with stem cells, is always a probability. Okay. When you have something like that, you just have to sit there and go, it doesn't make any sense. Okay. You did everything you could. And when everybody says, this is your lot in life, and they haven't found something that,
There
like,
was no root.
there's no
There was
root to
no
it, you have to
right.
sit there and go, okay, let me at least accept the fact that I still can be healed. I still can heal. Okay. And it goes on from there. You said it very well before, but, remember the saying that when the master is ready, the students appear. When the students are ready,
Absolutely.
the master appears. So when you're ready, my middle boy developed schizophrenia when he was young, at 15. And I was very much in traditional stuff at the time, but the medicines they gave him made him a non-entity. This is a boy that at 10 years of age read Dante's Inferno and explained it to me. Okay. And I looked at him and said, "Are you sure you're from this earth?" He said, "No, I'm an alien." I said, well, yeah, okay. But
I
nevertheless,
believe you.
yeah, really, I believe you.
I
You're
believe
proving it to
you.
me.
You're a lot
But,
smarter than me.
I'm a religious person. I was praying and I got mad. I said, this disease is messing with the wrong daddy. And right after that, one course after another and mentors and people, I was with the Neuroscience Corporation. I got the first certification in neuroendoimmunology, and their, their head of research and development, Dr. Olson, you know, took Jesse's case and brought it to, hundreds of doctors, and everything, I started learning about this. This is how I learned how to take care of old chronic illnesses because, I found the base of what people usually don't treat. But like I was sharing with you before, my son is 38. He's full-time work. He's a graphic artist and he's my hero. He's absolute my hero. Okay, because he got through all this stuff. And it wasn't just natural means. We had to use a combination of stuff. But
Mhm.
we also worked with
Mhm.
an integrated psychiatrist who, guess what, is one of the most brilliant women on the planet. Not just somebody who's going to throw prescriptions at you. She knew her stuff, in combination with what I knew. Guess what? I learned a ton, I learned a ton from her. You know, I'm not stupid. I
Absolutely.
learn where I can, Nevertheless, it just the whole way it happened. She wasn't taking new patients, and, I kind of pushed a little bit without being obnoxious. And she was like, okay. And she saw him at her home on a Sunday afternoon in Baltimore. Okay. Because otherwise, wait another 6 months, and it doesn't happen like that all the time. It happens
It
under God's
it does.
guidance. And if
It
you're not,
does.
take it spirit, take it universe. I don't care. And I know God
It
doesn't care what you call him anyway.
whatever that is, that's right.
Whatever it happens to be, it aligns. Okay.
Agreed.
And when it aligns, when you're doing, especially when you're doing something not for your own ego and your own self-aggrandizement, it aligns. Okay. And all you have to do is accept the alignment, look at it and say, hey, this feels good. Okay. And understand it. And the more you do it, the more you use your intuition, the more accurate it gets, only because, you're not filtering it out through your left brain. So just always remember that your symptoms are not your enemy. They're not your enemy. Okay. They are signals. Okay. And it's your body trying to have a conversation with you. Okay. So kind of change your thinking from how do I silence these symptoms to what are they trying to teach me?
Can I learn?
What can I learn? And then when you
Yeah.
say it like that, there's only one phrase that'll get you kicked out of my courses violently, by the way. Okay. The phrase is that can't happen. That's the last thing you'll hear as you're being thrown out the window. Okay. Because once you do that, you cut off lines of
Yes.
investigation.
Yes.
Sherlock Holmes always said, when you rule out the impossible, however improbable, must be the truth. Okay. So guess what? Sometimes when you're, you know, anxiety ridden and stuck at home and this is your lot in life, and somebody talks with you for a while and this happened in fourth grade, huh? Did I ask him about me? No. Spirit told him, say this,
That's
it'll
right.
be his
That's
hint.
right. That's right.
Otherwise he's not going to get it. It got
That's right.
that. And I was like, okay, yeah, I remember that, and of course I had to look it up because whatever. I don't mind. I don't know everything. I know a lot of stuff, but Albert Einstein always said, don't memorize stuff you can look up. I'm over there going, blah, blah, blah. Hey,
I
that's right.
can't feel my brain.
Right. Exactly. But it's first, I'm not broken. Second, look at your life, look at your signals And being in the flow, being at peace, I'm sure there's, all kinds of philosophical, words that are the equivalent. Okay. But being in the flow is being in the flow of energy, the flow of the universe. And it's, how can I put it? The flow is there to support you and feed and nurture you. Okay. And we do everything in our society to fight that. Everything has to be evidence based, but nobody ever asks about the quality of the evidence, which drives me out of my mind, by the way. What's the evidence for that? I'm like, that's the worst thing that ever happened to traditional medicine was depending on placebo controlled double blind studies instead of what's real. So if you have hypothyroidism, subclinical, which means you go to your doctor's office, it's 95 degrees out, you have a sweater on, you're losing your hair, you're gaining weight for no reason, but you have this normal thyroid test in your hand. In the 1960s and before, the doctor would look at you and say, I'll use this for toilet paper later, and start treating you. Now, they're not even allowed to treat you until the tests. You have Lyme disease, we'll give you 6 weeks of doxycycline. If you still have symptoms, then it's not Lyme disease. Where did that come from?
Bonkers. It's
Hey,
bonkers.
I had an infectious disease guy up against the wall because he said, well, Lyme disease can only give you an acute condition, not a chronic condition. And so he's saying that the Borrelia series, Borrelia bacteria, is the only set of microorganisms on the planet that can only give you an acute illness, not a chronic illness. And he kept repeating it like one of those talking heads.
Yeah.
And I wanted to get him up against the wall. I wanted to do like Darth Vader on it, like, I
There's
found
the
you
New
have a
Yorker in you.
diagnosis disturbing. Come on, man. It's like then you get all the politics and the whole thing with the mRNA vaccines and I've seen this. Before, like about 15, 20 years ago, there was no Lyme disease in Australia. Very simple. They didn't allow the diagnosis. Therefore, there was nothing there. Nobody kept any records. You want to be cynical? Well, maybe Big Pharma wants to treat the results rather than the issue. It leads you to the thought pattern of, is there more money in treating cancer than curing cancer? Is there more money
100%.
in treating diabetes than curing
100%.
diabetes? But if you have something, even if it's cancer, are there answers? Look, ask. You're not broken. You're not broken.
Listen, if that's the biggest thing to come out of this conversation, listener, tattoo it to the inside of your eyelids so that every time you blink, you get to read it. You are not broken. I can say that from personal experience. Had I just accepted that I was broken and would never recover, yes, that would have been absolutely true. But because my God, so filled with fear, leaned into the hope of maybe not being broken, that's where everything changed for me. Absolutely everything. And I had been living a life of living for others, but also living in curiosity, trying to figure out things. Our daughter, she was diagnosed with ADHD in the 4th grade. And I said, she's so mild. What if we're catching this before the habits form? What if we could change the way the neurons are firing in her brain? What if it's a muscle, just like every other muscle? What if we can work it differently? And that's when we discovered, I called it Noggin, because back then there was a network called the Noggin Network, and it was all of these little cartoons for kids that were extremely educational. And she loved the Noggin Network. Well, it turns out our daughter is extremely artistic, extremely intelligent, bored out of her skull in school. And yes, neurologically, numbers literally bounced on a page of paper. They moved like musical notes.
She had Irlen syndrome.
What is that?
Irlen syndrome is when the frequencies of light, your brain can't work their way through it. It's manifested by, and my son Jesse had this, but I always screen people for it. On the page that you're reading, the letters will do this. It's not just dyslexia. Dyslexia, think about dyslexia. Mm-hmm. If that's a D, it may look like or this, or P, or a Q.
Yeah.
That's like mirror image dyslexia, but the same concept goes with, and it has to do with the frequencies of light. What happens, and it manifests all this visual stuff that usually ends up creating ADD because, oh my God, I can't find it. I can't see it.
Right.
And in a kid brain, they don't have the rationalization. So this Dr. Irlen found that by using different colored screens, it would smooth out. So you go to this practitioner, it's very low tech, and they figure a certain amount of dyes, a certain amount of colors in a certain order will allow you to see normally. And it's not an eye correction. It's a perception collection. And then you send the glasses off to a company. They send you back after They did that. Now, my son Jesse had the same thing. He was in college, and we had to pull him out like almost every semester medically because the anxiety was crazy. And one day I'm sitting there with his psychiatrist and him, and he said, "Well," she said, "what happened? You just went from 3 dimensions to two dimensions." And she writes this down on paper. She hands it to me, says, "See if he's got this." It had Irlen syndrome. So I look at it, and I'm like, okay, and they have screens, overlays that you can put on a computer screen to see if one makes you see a lot better than another, which gives you an indication. So I ended up taking him to the practitioner, and she found out that he could only had a visual field like this,
Yeah.
and things were bouncing around. Within an hour, she had the right combination of things, which she did in different lights. And, she wrote me whatever the script was, and I sent frames off to California. About 2 weeks later, he gets them back. I get a call. I'm in my car, right? And he said, the glasses came, I put them on. He said, "Dad, I didn't know it was so beautiful around here." I started crying like a baby. Oh, my God. Okay.
Yeah.
And from that point forward, he could go to school. Okay. Now, mind you, he's neurodiverse, but he's brilliant. So we took algebra. He had to take Ativan to take a test. We took calculus.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
He took calculus. He understood it. I call a psychiatrist up and
Yeah.
say, he can't do algebra, but he can do calculus. What gives? She said, "You ever hear Einstein?" Click. Okay.
That was me.
Mhm.
Algebra gave me such anxiety,
Mhm.
but give me calculus, trigonometry, physics. I was fine. I was perfectly fine. I was excited by all
It's
of
the
that.
part of your brain you're using that's
Yeah.
more conceptual than algorithmic. Simple as
Yes.
that. But that kind of thing, when you say this going all over the place, yes, it can be with music. But if somebody would say that to me, I'd be thinking, let's check out Irlen syndrome. Because if that is, my gosh, you do this.
What an easy fix.
And you stay with it, and it changes as the inflammation of the brain goes down. But that's one of the reasons the inflammation is there, because it's constantly trying to compensate for this. It's very cool. It's called IRLEN syndrome, and you can just look it up. And they have this, they'll get you. Just look it up and check into it.
I will look it up. Even though we put her through a program, and here's the thing that really, annoys me. Insurance didn't cover it, of course.
What else is
Insurance
new?
didn't cover it. It was all out of pocket, but it was, listen, it was thousands of dollars back then, and it was money well spent because they did this therapy for her that involved special lighting, specialized music, and exercises and a metronome. They would put special lighting in these rooms, in very small rooms, dim the lighting, have it be different colors coming from different sections of the room. And then the music was always classical at a certain rhythm. The metronome was set to the quarter beat. She was then, one of the exercises was given a ball to bounce from wall to wall on the half beat and just play like that. It was play, just play. And then they would start asking her math facts. So they were strengthening and utilizing different areas of her brain to allow for her to absorb and comprehend math facts. The girl never failed another math test after these trainings. And she had gone from a straight A student to a failing student, and the school system was like, let's just get her into middle school, just keep pushing her through. And it took a lot of insistence on my husband and my part to get the school board to recognize that some kids need different things. Blow your minds, but
Well, for your listeners who have neurodiverse children, a lot of these exercises like brain balance and stuff like that,
yeah.
if you notice that they help a lot, but when you stop doing them, the condition returns. The conclusion there is that there's a lot of neural inflammation that has to be gotten rid of. If you get rid of this, then you do something like brain balance, it will stick, if you will.
Yeah.
Okay. But look for that, because lots of times, especially in the autistic area, like the Autism Research Institute, they don't recognize the fact that autism has root causes. They just say it's a roll of the cosmic dice. Okay. And then that's wrong, because in 1970 it was 1 in 10,000 births. Now it's 1 in 34. I'm sorry. That doesn't make any sense what you're saying. So if we get that indicator, you say, okay, let's work on this neural inflammation, find the root cause, take care of I'm trying not to speak medicalese. That's why I'm going take care of the
Are
inflammation.
you kidding me? I love it. I know, but go ahead.
I was thinking of microglial priming. I'm like, I don't want to say that enough to explain it.
I need another word.
Okay. It's just the air, once the cells get inflamed, then they don't want to stay inflamed, and that's why And sometimes a very small stimulation creates a big response. When they're at their resting stage, it takes a fair amount of stimulation to create a response. But when they're already primed, okay, they're like this, waiting, and all you just touch them and go, okay. So in that particular case, you might see that. So again, the child's not broken; just has to be
Yes.
correctly
What
fixed, if you
works for
will.
you?
Hmm.
What works for you? So,
Exactly.
listeners, I've had an amazing hour. I can't believe it went by so fast. I
It
say that
really
all
is.
the time because my guests are so wonderful. But this is what I'm talking about when I say come to the buffet of healing. Take what works for you. Keep exploring. If it works, great. Go run with it. Come back. Try new things. Run with those. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. Bring them all back to the buffet. Try something else. But the key is keep trying. Keep trying. Don't lose hope. You are not broken. If I could say that for an hour straight, I would. You are not broken. You are not broken. There is always, always, always hope. Dr. Jess clearly is available around the world, all over the place. So just scroll down. His links are in the show notes. Scroll down, click away, start learning even more. But Dr. Jess, just so the listener who is maybe in their car going, "Holy shit, this was awesome. How do I get in touch with him?" How can the listeners find you?
Well, just my name, drjessarmine.com. Okay. If you wanted to talk with me about an issue, yours or a child, on the bottom of the page, you hit this get acquainted button. And they'll schedule you for a complimentary 30-minute session where we can just talk about it. I love to do those because as a result of that, if we say, okay, if I look at you and say I can help you, then I know I can help you. I don't require a lot of lab tests before you come in, stuff like that. I do it if you will, the old fashioned way, take a good history and then figure it out from there. Yeah, really. If you wanted to go to my Instagram channel, it's Dr. Jess Online 724, which is my birthday. And my YouTube channel has a ton of videos I've done over the years, which is just Dr. Jess on YouTube.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Dr. Jess, this has
Thank
been
you.
amazing. Thank you.
This
Are
has
you
been so
kidding?
much
Thank
fun.
you. You're
Thank
a
you so
wealth
much.
of knowledge.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. My pleasure. All right, listeners, listen, there's a lot in this episode. So if you have questions, leave them in the comments. Leave them in the comments and I will be sure to read them and get you answers. Anything else? Is there any? I don't think there's any. I mean, listen, there's probably a bazillion things more that we could talk about.
You, tell you a little secret. I can talk for hours. Okay, upon hours. Pick a subject. I would love to come back. Pick a subject, and we'll go into it in depth. You want to talk about long COVID? I'd love to get
Mm,
into that because it's a new issue that they're going to let become chronic with no treatment, and then you're going to have to treat the end results. You want to talk about neurodiversity and a different point of view of that. You want to talk about hormonal problems and a different point of view of that. On that, I did a lecture in the Ultimate Hormones Conference, and my subject was when you're doing everything right and your patient's not responding, where do you look? Okay. That's
love
what I
that.
love to do. And guess what? A lot of it's logical, but if you kind of have the mindset, you can be your own advocate a whole lot better. So you pick a subject, I'll be here with a big grin on my face.
Fabulous. All right, listeners, you heard it here first. Pick a subject, put it down in the comments. We'll have them back. Thank you so much for listening this entire time, listeners. Thank you for learning right alongside of me. And Dr. Jess, thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your time,
Thank
your
you so
knowledge,
much
your
for having me. I
expertise.
appreciate it.
Thank you for giving us hope. Thank you for telling us we're not broken. Listeners, I hope you will join me for the next episode of Find Your Flow. Until then, I'll see ya. Okay, that's it, listener. Before you go, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and set your notifications to never miss an episode. If you'd like even more with me, come on over to nagarelife.com. And if you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, go on and share it. Share it with somebody that you think would enjoy it as well. All right. I'll see you next time.